Because clerk, elect the clerk for tonight. Motion, do we, Linda, to nominate?
Yeah, I move to nominate Jane Hotchkiss as the clerk for the evening.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, Jane. Town accountant warrants. Minutes of June 18, July 2nd, and July 16. Sunday entertainment licenses, Emerson Umbrella for September 30th and October 7th, 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. Theater at 57 Hall Road to 9 Acre Corner. One-day special licenses, Concord Chamber of Commerce on October 11, 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. at 100 Newbury Court, Wine and Malt. Daniel Pierce, September 29th, 4 p.m. to 7 p.m. at 40 Westward Road, Wine and Malt. Revisers at October 1st, 11 a.m. to 7 p.m. at 246 Ornac, Wine and Malt. Vero Farm, October 19th, 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. at 11 Wheeler Road, Wine and Malt. Household Goods, October 20th, 7 p.m. to 10 p.m., 11 Wheeler Road, Wine and Malt. Concord Prison Outreach, October 27th, 4 p.m. to 7 p.m., 81 Elm Street, wine only. Commonwealth Financial, October 16th, 11 a.m. to 3 p.m., 40 Westford Road, Wine and Malt. Development Strategy Consultants, September 27, 28, 29, October 4, 5, 6, and 9, 6 p.m. to 11 p.m., 57 Ornac, Wine and Malt. And also September 20th and October 7th, 2 p.m. to 6 p.m., 57 Ornac, Wine and Malt. We also have a proclamation for the Concord Carlisle Community Chest month of October 2018. Whereas Concord Carlisle Community Chest was founded in 1947 to provide support for community human service agencies, and whereas agencies and programs funded by the Concord Carlisle Community Chest serve the need of our neighbors from our youngest to our oldest, and whereas the Concord Carlisle Community Chest has participated in partnerships with the town of Concord, including domestic violence services, Concord Recreation Scholarships, Communities for Restorative Justice, Council on Aging, the Community Service Coordinator and Youth Coordinator, Concord Public Schools, CCHS, and Concord Cares. And whereas the Concord Carlisle Community Chest carefully evaluates each funding request to ensure that donations are spent efficiently and effectively, and whereas the Concord Carlisle Community Chest assists member agencies in the town at large, responds to the needs identified by human services professionals and concerned citizens, and whereas the Concord Carlisle Community Chest and its member agencies depend upon the generous contributions by thousands of individuals and businesses, and whereas the Concord Carlisle Community Chest annual campaign begins October 1, 2018. Now, therefore, we, the Select Board of the Town of Concord, Massachusetts, do hereby proclaim the month of October 2018 as Concord Carlisle Community Chest Month in the Town of Concord, to recognize the vital role of the Community Chest plays in the life of our town and to wish members of the Community Chest success in reaching their annual campaign fund raising goal. We hereby proclaim the October 18th as the Concord Carlisle Community Chest Month. And with that, we go to the town manager report. Move to accept, okay?
I move to accept the consent agenda.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Now the town manager.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you know, next Monday, October 1st, we have a special town meeting. There was a problem with the posting of notification for that special town meeting. We mailed the warrant to all households as required by bylaw and posted the warrant online 20 days before the town meeting, which was in compliance with the law. But our bylaw requires that the warrant be posted in the 5 polling locations 14 days prior to the special town meeting. That posting took place last Tuesday, 13 days before the special town meeting will convene. This procedural defect can be corrected through special legislation, which cities and towns have used often to correct technical errors in the past. Last year, North Reading had the same problem with a special town meeting in the fall, and they had special legislation approved that would validate all of the action taken at its town meeting. And in 2010, Concord had a flaw with its posting on the annual election that had to be corrected with special legislation. So on Thursday, I forwarded a letter to the governor asking the governor to submit special legislation similar to North Reading's on behalf of Concord to the legislature. Our legislators can only submit legislation that's been approved by town meetings, so that's why the governor had to get involved. And that's on the governor's desk. We hope that he'll act on that tomorrow, and that the legislation, again, validating the actions taken at the October 1st special town meeting will be approved by the legislature in short order. So the citizen survey was mailed out to residents last Thursday. It was mailed to 7,066 households in Concord. There are 43 questions on the citizen survey. It takes about 15 minutes to complete. 2 years ago, 1,022 residents responded, or about 15% of the population took the time to participate. It's important information that town departments and town officials use to evaluate how we're doing and how our services are, so we hope we can exceed the 15% participation that we had 2 years ago.
Well, as a resident of town who's already filled out the survey, it's also important to remember that you can do it online.
That's right. Great, thank you, Jane. Relative to the intersection of Main Street and Commonwealth Avenue, we had a meeting on site last Friday with some residents and businesses that had expressed some concern. The design engineer has agreed to our proposal to cut about 12 feet back from the existing curb line that you see there, and that would require the relocation of the sidewalk and the light stanchions, but it would be relatively inexpensive. So we're going to be putting a proposal before Mass DOT later this week to ask them to make it easier for tractor trailers to negotiate that turn without costing any parking spaces.
There was safety concerns raised.
That's the Comprehensive Sustainable Energy Committee hosted an electric vehicle showcase on Saturday the 15th of September. About 200 residents attended. A lot of them took a test drive. Many of them indicated they're planning to purchase electric vehicles. So our inventory of electric vehicles owned in town is going up.
And we used our electric bus, I believe.
The electric bus was there.
Yeah.
It was a wonderful effort by Brian Folds and the Comprehensive Sustainable Energy Committee. This month, in the month of September, the electric bills will reflect that 1 cent per kilowatt hour that the Light Board voted to green our power. So the proceeds of that 1 cent increase will be used to purchase SRECs, or solar renewable energy credits, or other renewable energy credits so that we can purchase green power. And the expectation is that by the end of calendar 2019, 67% of Concord's electricity will come from green power sources. There are no left turn signs, in the neighborhood near Neshotic and Simon Willard Road, preventing vehicles from turning left during commuter hours off of Elm Street or Route 2A and cutting through the neighborhood. Those were put up today as a pilot process through the police chief's authority. If they prove to be successful, the board will be asked to adopt permanent regulations prohibiting left turns off Elm Street onto Neshotic and Simon Willard during the morning commute hours.
Is that alone? I mean, I can think of a number of places
there
where
are
that...
quite a few. So we have a traffic engineer taking a look at, I think it's about 16 to 20 locations where similar turning movements are being encouraged by the software, Waze and other software that encourage people to go down side streets or residential streets to get off of busy arterial roads.
Do you know whether or not a police officer will be stationed there in the first
I understand there was informational patrols this morning. Okay. So I think they will be out there playing an educational role, educating people about the change in the rules.
So are we also looking at the intersection of Elm and Sudbury Road? Is that Sudbury? No, Elm and Main Street, because a lot of people choose to take that left-hand turn because it's easier than trying to get onto Main Street at the end of Elm. you've got to turn your head backwards, a lot of,
Going onto
constant
River
stream of
Street?
cars.
No, going on to when
Onto-
it joins Main.
Where you're coming up Elm, people would turn left to go up Neshottuck, so where there's a stoplight at the end so you can get onto Main Street. If you come up to the intersection of Elm and Main, it's a difficult intersection.
It is.
A constant flow of
Visibility.
traffic. So I'm thinking we should, if
So-
we're looking at the intersection at Neshottuck, we should look at the intersection at Elm and Main.
Elm and Main.
And
Okay.
see if there's, what happens to allow traffic to turn left at Main Street there.
I'll make sure that's on
The
the list.
difficult turn.
Thank you. And then just one last item, the Giroux land planning process is, the second public forum is October 16th at 7 p.m. here in the hearing room of the Townhouse to continue the dialogue about how the newly acquired Giroux property could be integrated into our park planning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I just have a couple of comments. We had the recount of the Democratic primary for the office of the United States Representative. Dan Cole and Laurie Trahan. It was completed. Ms. Trahan was declared the winner of the primary. The general election is scheduled for November 6th. The town clerk's office did a commendable job in handling the recount, which is not a usual procedure, and required a number of volunteers, some training, and a full Saturday of counting and processing. So thanks to the clerk's office and the many volunteers. Tonight, among a number of items, there are two that have been before the board on prior occasions, the Punkatasset parking and the Verizon cell towers. I do not know where these discussions will lead, but I do want to commend the Concord citizens who have raised reasonable concerns and brought a spirit of respect for the select board and town administration to the discussions. Being willing to listen as well as advocate for their position is hopefully the way forward at arriving at a solution that's beneficial to the town, reinforces the standard of self-government. Because we have a very busy schedule, I'd ask for public comments after each item, but would request that any comment be limited to 2 minutes and ask that you try not to reiterate points previously made. The board received a petition in support for a new cell tower site in the CPW yard on Kai's Road, signed by 106 citizens, many with personal comments. So we do have those. Those are very helpful, and thank you for that. And it is appreciated how this has been going forward. So with that, we will move to item number 5, discussion of affordable fund options. Liz, will you? Well, wherever you'd like. Whatever's easiest.
Hi, I'm Liz Rust. I'm the Director of the Regional Housing Services Office and resident at 201 Commonwealth Avenue. So I'm here today. There was a short memo in your packet, is that right? That talks about options for affordable housing funds. So the background in this is, of course, the town of Concord has the potential opportunity to receive $1 million in donated funds for the purpose of affordable housing to be discussed and voted at the special town meeting on October 1st. And so this is an opportunity to look at where those funds might be housed. So I just put together some options really for your discussion and review. So it's a brief summary, should the funds be available. This hasn't been reviewed with town council, and I'm no expert on all the kinds of municipal funds, but I think that this provides a general overview. It could also be reviewed with the Affordable Housing Funding Committee as a next step. And as we go through, you'll see some are more permanent solutions and some are more one-time to take advantage of this specific, unique opportunity.
I think one of the issues on this was sort of where the funds would be, who would have control over them, and wanting to make sure that they would remain for the purpose of affordable housing, assisting in that, because the town would be, in essence, giving up 2 units up there.
Exactly. I think the warrant article is specific that the fund would be designated for affordable housing to the as agreed to by the zoning board and yourselves, I believe. So I had 7 kinds of funds, and I think that some of it is exactly what you mentioned, is where the authority and the approval for spending the money comes from. You have like a stabilization fund that could be set up to this purpose. In fact, Lexington just did that last town meeting. They had a significant ongoing source of affordable housing funds, and so they set up a stabilization fund through town meeting, and appropriating out of that fund would also require a town meeting vote. So that's sort of one option of what would be the role of town meeting in authorizing these funds. There are revolving funds, which town meeting establishes them, and I think that you see this on the annual town meeting and sets the annual spending limit. Again, this would be segregated from the general fund. And funding approval and expenditure is determined on how you set it up. So you have a lot of options. I don't know any examples of revolving funds set up for affordable housing purposes. My impression of revolving funds is that they're used more for ongoing expenses that are more regular. So if this is an occasional influx of revenue and infrequent expenses, I don't know if that's the best setup, but I don't know if there's anything in the Massachusetts general law that would preclude using a revolving fund. But it gives you a lot of flexibility on how you want to set up the authority and approval. Acton has had a lot of success with gift funds, and here on this chart you can see the Massachusetts general law that outlines exactly how these funds are set up and used. And they have done that through select board approval, and they've used them for very similar kinds of situations. So Concord Muse gave Acton some amount of funds as part of that development, so that a special gift fund was set up. They have gift funds that are set up for each contribution, each gift, and their selectmen are the approvers of spending out of that fund.
So in other words, that wouldn't need to go to town meeting?
No. Here I just called nonprofit, where the select board, you could transfer the funds to the Housing Authority and or the Concord Housing Development Corporation directly. And those two organizations, as you're well aware, were set up for those purposes, so that it would just fit right into what they're already chartered to do. And you could define any kind of requirements for what types of expenses, what kind of annual reporting you might require on the use of those funds to make sure they're, being used for however you intended.
So what you're saying, we can require, we can identify these funds for restricted uses. So we can be used for administrative purposes, that would be restricted for the development of...
And I think that each of those organizations would want to come and talk about their views for, what some of the permitted uses would be. Whether, preservation uses or only creation or some of their other programs that have no other funding sources. I think we've talked about that. Both those organizations do have programs that have no other funding sources and they can't use CPA. So some small amount of money towards those, I know that they would go a long way, but then really the bulk would be for creating units. I think that's what everyone intends. You can also use CPA. You can deposit money or deposit money right into your housing portion of CPA. And it's possible, though not many people think it's a great idea initially, but then when they kind of get into it, it then becomes CPA funds, so you have to appropriate out through the CPA process with the town meeting, and there's a limit that you can't go above the 3% total. On a much more extensive kind of basis, you could set up a municipal affordable housing trust. There's special Massachusetts general law that allows towns to adopt the Massachusetts general law. And I know when the CHDC was first chartered back in 2008-ish, somewhere there, this was one of the options that was weighed, and the town opted to go with the CHDC. So, but it is another option, and it comes with its own fund, and it's part of the town, and the town custodian and treasurer maintain the fund. And then you have enterprise funds, which again, aren't normally thought of for this kind of purpose. But it is a type of municipal fund, so I put it here, though I don't know that it would be applicable.
I see you say fund, the oversight is by an outside board, so.
Often the enterprise funds are like that. I mean, I'm not sure, but I would assume that you could set it up differently, but it's usually, the swimming pools or, something like that. So it's not really for the infrequent activity, which I imagine what would happen with these funds.
Liz, could you just explain, you mentioned no appropriation under the gift funds.
Yes.
Can you say a little bit more about that?
So I use Acton as an example, and so when they set up the funds, and then the select board, the selectmen in Acton are able to approve expenditures out of the fund.
Okay. And are they limited to, can you use funds across the gift accounts within the categories of the gift account towards a specific project?
I have read some examples where if they can be set up, most simply they're set up for one gift, creates one fund, but you can have a larger fund to accept multiple gifts. Like if you were going to do like some park and you were accepting gifts for like bricks or something, like one of those things, you could have multiple gifts go into the fund. It's a little bit more complex, but the DOR guidance does talk to that being allowed. But Acton, I know, uses it for specific projects, and they might have 5 or 6 different gift funds, and they'll spend out of one, and then the next one will come in, and they're often receiving donations from developers of their larger project. And this is what they use. And I know you use the same town council firm, so that they're going to be very familiar with that process.
So just, that brings up a question for me. How common is this practice of, this will come to select board, to town meeting, special town meeting this month, or October 1st. How common is accepting developer money versus
Common.
Certainly coming in Boston.
And
that's what I
people
wanted to.
do it all different ways. Some people do just like a development services agreement, and
Right.
in the development services agreement have specified this much money are going to go to the school technology,
Right.
and this much is going to go here, and then when the payments come in, they just go to wherever they're going.
Right. Because it's been presented here somewhat uniquely, but I don't think it is as unique as perhaps.
Right.
We've
What
looked
makes
at
it
it.
unique here is that it's a restricted purpose upon donation. So where would that purpose be? And Concord doesn't already have a fund set up to receive affordable housing funds. Like if you
Hence-
already had one of those or a precedent, this would be, I think the Munson Road one was the last one I was aware of, like some number of years ago. And I'm not sure what fund it was actually in, but this might be an opportunity to set a different kind of precedent.
Some of these
So-
funds would allow for individual contributions if somebody wanted to give just because they believed in affordable housing, they could contribute to a fund that is already set up for this purpose.
Of course, and I know the Concord Foundation really does a lot of that, and the Concord Housing Development Corporation actually gets like 2 or 3 donations a year. So that does happen already today.
Sorry, Linda, did you?
I was just going to say, I think the housing groups, as well as the town in general, has had challenges when opportunities have arisen throughout the year, and they needed the flexibility to respond. So, I'm broadening it beyond just the 2 existing housing groups that are already in position to do the developing or whatever needs to be done. So that's a concern, and I would hope that we could take that into account.
You mean not going to town meeting? Is that what you mean?
One, to have the flexibility to respond
Yeah.
throughout to the extent that we can, throughout the year to respond to opportunities. And 2, to have the ability for the 2 housing entities as well as the town to respond because some of those opportunities come to the town and not to the two housing groups. So all, all three could benefit, if you want to look at it that way.
Anybody else on the board? Anybody in the public like to make a comment? Seeing none, thank you very much, Liz. That's very helpful.
Thanks,
Yeah. We now, item number 6, which is the public hearing, alteration of premises for alcohol served at Nashotah Country Club. Do I have a motion to open the hearing?
I move to open the public hearing.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
We received an email at 12:58 p.m. today stating, unfortunately, our architect could not provide the necessary material and time for tonight's meeting. Our general manager is also working on getting a copy of the deed. We will not make tonight's hearing and will shoot for the next one. I'll deliver materials as soon as I receive them. Let me know if there are any other items missing. Much gratitude, Boris, who is Lowbrig, who is at the Nashotah Country Club. So with that in mind, do I have another motion?
You do. I move to continue the public hearing to October 15th, 2018.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. We now move to the wireless communication facility and public safety discussion.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, please.
It wasn't long after the board decided not to locate a cell tower in the Emerson Emerson Field area. Shortly after the decision was made, we received quite a few comments from a variety of sources on the unusually poor cell service. I think starting with our new assistant fire chief, who comes to us from Maynard and attempted to place a few calls his first week on the job from different places throughout the town, was shocked that he couldn't place a cell call from a remote location while he was on the road. And then we've had other public safety related concerns expressed where someone was trying to reach the fire department for minor medical and had trouble getting through and was concerned that it had been a major medical problem, and the drop calls happened repeatedly. We've heard from a number of businesses. I know someone that was standing in line at a local coffee shop, and the 3 customers in front of her attempted to pay with the credit card and were with their phone, with the phone, unable to. And we're beginning to hear all kinds of stories about the really poor cell coverage in Concord Center, which we hadn't heard much during the earlier conversation. So we did contact Verizon about that. Someone did, a number of people, Mr. Lawson I think included, mentioned that they wondered if Verizon had turned down the big dial that provided service in Concord Center. They assured us, and they're here tonight, so they can assure you as well, that isn't what happened. It's the fact that there's the calls that are being placed are overwhelming the system that currently exists. They predicted this 3 to 4 years ago when they first approached us to improve the cell coverage, and it's coming to light, and it is only going to get worse. So I thought I'd have some of the town public safety staff comment, as well as other staff that are here, and then Verizon is here to answer any questions that the board might have.
We both have the fire chief and the police chief. I don't know if which one would like to go first. Come right on up, sir. Yeah, there's the mic.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Tom Judge, Fire Chief. So my information is anecdotal. I think it's no mystery to anybody that when we drive through the center now, we can pretty much expect to drop a call. That's been my experience in the Walden Main Street area, and that's a concern for public safety for a couple of reasons. First, if we were operating in the center and we needed to be able to communicate by cell phone, that's limited now. In addition to communicating by cell phone, we also have a lot of things that we do now that involve data. So it compromises our iPads, it compromises our ability to use laptops that are relying on data. for a variety of information that we store. Those are things that we could probably overcome. We could go back and go back to paper, which is not really desirable. But I think of more of a concern to me is looking at the center and the inability for somebody traveling through town to make a 911 call to request help. And that's complicated now more by the fact that there are no more payphones. We used to have payphones at the mini park in the center. We used to have call boxes. The fire alarm system in town included call boxes. And one of the big factors that went into decommissioning that system was that we had cell phone service, and that there was a period of time where we never received an emergency by call box that wasn't accompanied by several 911 calls from cell phones. So it is a concern now that we have the center of Concord with, this inability to make a cell phone call, and it just lends itself to the inability of somebody to make a 911 call to report an emergency. Going back a number of years, when we had the call boxes, there was a fire at what is now the Coldwell Banker building. I think it was Power Realty at the time, possibly. That was reported by the call box in the square. That was box 24, somebody pulled that box. There was a fire at the stationery store in the basement of the Colonnade building, and that was reported by call box. In both cases, cell phones didn't exist then, or if they did, they were not all that popular. Today, those reports would have to come in by cell phone, or somebody's going to have to drive to a better area to get a signal, or they're going to have to drive to the fire station. So I think that pretty much sums up my concerns with it. It's it's all about giving people the ability to report what they're seeing, and our ability to communicate when we're working and operating around the center of Concord.
Thank you.
Are you aware of any situation where somebody wasn't able to make the call on a safety issue?
There was the medical emergency, and I don't have the details on it, but there was the medical emergency that Mr. Whalen alluded to, and that did happen. It was not a life-threatening emergency, so it.
You were lucky.
Yeah, I mean, it did allow for somebody to get into a position where they had better service to make a call. But yeah, we were lucky. It's if it were a cardiac arrest, something along those lines, it's a much more serious situation.
I think action better taken before we have a situation that is a tragedy.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
thank you. Anybody, Linda, with any? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Joseph O'Connor. I'm the police chief. I'll keep my comments brief. They really echo the feelings that the fire chief just expressed. But I spoke to my lead dispatcher today, Nancy Campbell, who oversees all the 911 calls. The police department oversees that responsibility, dispatching police, fire, and EMS. And I asked her about cell phone calls from the Concord Center. And she said that we're dropping calls on a consistent basis there. I know firsthand from being in the center on quite a regular basis, the inability to make calls, use data with texting or emails, particularly if you're in a building. And I can pretty much tell when I'm talking to a member of my staff where they are, because we'll drop calls when they're in Concord Center. Setting aside the inconvenience piece of that, as the fire chief was mentioning, time is important, particularly in the medical calls or any type of emergency. And the number of people that we have from outside of the town, the chief alluded to someone coming to the station, tourists, and the number of tourists that are in town, or people coming, visiting, shopping, using our restaurants, and so forth. They may not know where that is. They may hesitate and continue trying to get calls through, and we just quite often we're losing those calls, and it's a concern. And quite frankly, it's not just in Concord Center. I talked to my school resource officer in schools and other places in town. place locations in West Concord. The cell service is certainly an issue, but particular Concord Center is a problem for us.
Is this something that you noticed more recently, or is this an ongoing problem? Because we seem to have received a lot of letters at a particular point. We hadn't heard very many complaints prior to this spate of letters and correspondence we had. Was it the same for you, that there was a sudden change, or what seemed to be a particular change in drops calls?
I can't give you a definitive answer on that. What I can tell you is I think there's been more awareness and more conversation in the community about it, and maybe possibility that that's what's driving it. I do know that, we see, on the parking meters, for example, dropping signals on those on a regular basis. And, there's different types of factors I've been learning, time of year, time of day, moisture in the air, and a number of different things that play into that. But I know there is, a lot of conversation when I'm walking the center. People do talk about it on a regular basis. I think that's because of the public awareness that's been brought on, the discussions here, and the members of the public who are discussing the issue.
Thank you very much. Good evening.
Good evening. I'm Kate Hodges, Assistant Town Manager. Andrew, could you put up the slide of existing conditions? I just wanted to provide a brief overview for the board about our activities, at least in my office, in the past 3.5 years. So about 3.5 years ago, representatives from Verizon Wireless approached the town in order to discuss and brainstorm ideas related to what they believe to be mounting connectivity and capacity issues. So to better understand the mounting issues in an attempt to get some type of unbiased opinion regarding options, we hired an RF engineer, which stands for radio frequency engineer, to look at the town's search rings and identify where we have gaps in coverage. That engineer's name is Ivan Pagasek. I'm presenting this information because he's unable to be here tonight, but this is a map that he generated approximately a year ago. As you can see, Main Street is almost in the center. The search rings are in blue. Blue means that it is good coverage, very rare for a drop call, less than 10%. Green is spotty coverage, maybe 50-50, and white is little to no connectivity. In our meeting with the Verizon representatives those years ago, Marcia Rasmussen, the Director of Planning and Land Management, was also present, and we were informed that the reason they were approaching us 3.5 years prior to start the process is because we were looking to experience, Concord was going to experience something called sector exhaustion, which is what happens when the existing framework and network connectivity isn't able to keep up with the demand. So over the past 3 years, and particularly the year since this map has been created, the use of cellular devices has only grown, and it's not only expanded from the handhelds, but it also is in cash registers and iPhones, meters, our data-driven devices, iWatches, and lots of other devices that weren't here 3.5 years ago. There's a number of sites that we reviewed together, both with Ivan, myself. We spoke with Marcia and representatives from Verizon. I personally walked more than half a dozen municipal sites. That was our main focus. I didn't participate in looking at private sites, but my understanding is Verizon did. The cupola at the time, the Emerson cupola, was determined to be a desirable location because it wasn't going to be visible to the public and it would service the downtown. The other location that was identified was the Keyes Road campus. Andrew, could you go to the umbrella, please? This is the coverage with the Umbrella Arts building as done by our RF engineer. So as you can see, the blue pretty much encapsulates most of the downtown area in blue. And then the other existing sites are there. There's still some spotty white areas that we can see up near Author's Ridge, etc. But it's not as densely populated up there. if you could go to the, this is with the Public Works site. Looks like connectivity is fine. It doesn't necessarily go out as far as where the high school is located, but it still would serve quite a bit of good for the downtown. I'm going to just ask that our Department of Planning and Land Management Director, Marcia Rasmussen, come up and talk about this particular site at the Public Works site and the reasons why we didn't explore that further with the Verizon, because she was present for their initial application about a decade ago.
Terrific, thanks.
Good evening. Marcia Rasmussen, Director of Planning and Land Management. The Keyes Road site was investigated by another company, OmniPoint, back in 2006. And an application was made first to the Historic Districts Commission. Part of the process, because wireless communications seeks a license through the Federal Telecommunications Act, they have to address something called the Section 106, which is the National Historic Preservation Act of 1966, and it requires those seeking sites for wireless communication to take into account the effects of an installation. So when this Keyes Road site was being investigated, we conducted balloon tests to see what the height would be. And the denial by the Historic Districts Commission was based on both the design and the height of the tower and its visibility from the Sudbury River, which is a wild and scenic river, subject to the National Park Service. The Minuteman National Historical Park, both North Bridge and the Barrett Farmhouse, it was visible. And the Main Street and Monument Square and Barrett's Farm historic districts, which are all listed on the National Register. So I was approached by some of our residents to find out, well, is it just the Historic Districts Commission? And it's not. It's the state's Historic Preservation Officer and the Historical Commission that also must comment about the site and how it is being addressed. And so those are the reasons why it would probably not succeed if we were to select that site and install a tower because of its visibility and impact on historic resources. There's two slides that I've had prepared. This shows our historic districts, and all those dots that you see on Main Street and Monument Square, those are all sites that are listed on the state's register, and many of them are probably eligible for listing on the National Historic Register. There is a second slide. This is showing where the Sudbury River is located and the various land ownerships. There is town conservation lands are in blue. Our federal lands are in yellow. Off to the upper right from where I'm seated, and is the Minuteman National Park. And then the overlay, the hatching is floodplain, is either floodplain or wetlands. And so the Keyes Road site was not entirely in the floodplain back in 2006. FEMA has redefined our floodplain, and the Keyes Road site is now entirely in the floodplain. So we have that additional hurdle to overcome if we were to pursue installation at Keyes Road.
How long a process is it if we were to, or Verizon was to proceed with the Keyes Road to get some type of a reading as to whether they might, it sounds like it's somewhat discretionary. We've got a steep hill, if you will, but it still is somewhat discretionary.
This is the decision. This is the information that was gathered. There are hundreds of pictures in here. I don't know. I really can't say, because the volume of people who were interested and commented in the negative on the impacts to our historic resources and our natural resources. I don't know if anyone would, after reviewing this file, would respond to a request for proposals because of the Section 106 findings that have to be made.
questions?
What is the date of that report? Is that from 2006, or is this a more recent one?
No, this is from 2006. This was the file that was presented to the Historic Districts Commission. It never made it to the Board of Appeals. They withdrew early on after getting that denial.
And what I'm understanding from you is that things have only the extension of the floodplain adds another layer.
Yes.
But other than that, none of the reasoning in that application has changed.
No, that's correct.
Okay.
There,
But I guess the only thing that perhaps has changed is the needs of the town.
Right.
And whether that's taken into account, given sort of other issues such as population and the citizen participation and health issues.
Right.
well, actually, health issues are not the purview of the Board of Appeals in making a decision.
I understand the Board of Appeals, but the Historic Commission could take that into account.
No, they can't.
They can't.
No, they're prohibited from taking that into consideration. That's expressly in the telecommunications.
Any other locations we can?
Do you have a box, a magic box?
I do not have a magic box.
It strikes me that we cannot be the first town to be at this juncture of need and locational paucity. So, do we have any sense of how other towns have proceeded here?
I don't have any. I know that when the MBTA was looking at certain things along their corridor, they were looking, that was, we commented about that, and they've taken a step back and are re-examining what they're offering and how that might proceed. I am aware of one of the northern seaport communities where they were successful in turning over a cell tower because they installed little radio towers, repeaters, on existing light poles, and so they were less obtrusive because it was a historically significant town.
Okay.
So there are options. They may not be as desirable or as, there are, they come with all different issues that go along with them.
Thank you.
Kate Hodges again. I thought I'd just tell you the other sites that we visited. We went to the high school and we discussed putting an extension onto the lights that are around the Doug White Field up at the top of the hill. That isn't town property, as you know, so I believe Verizon is still discussing that with the school committee, but I don't believe they've had any forward momentum on that. We looked at putting something near the roof of the Beatty Center, but the Beatty Center is further down elevation-wise, and the tower would be so massive that it wouldn't be structurally sound. We looked at the Emerson Field flagpole, which I believe we talked about at a meeting over the summer. And it is workable, but I think it's less desirable for the community, although I'm not sure that was ever determined. We looked at Hayward Meadow. Again, that was not enough height to be able to substantiate having, and Verizon has also told us they're not particularly interested in building a tower. They're expensive. And we looked at the former landfill site, and that isn't within the search ring. And we looked at the cupola that is in the visitor center, and that isn't high enough. And then there were a couple of other private churches in apartment complex that were looked at. Actually, all of the churches in the downtown area, with the exception of one, already have a cellular service in them. They just don't happen to be Verizon. And the one that is empty is not interested at this time. And there were a few other places that we looked along the Route 2 corridor, but again, that didn't service the downtown area. And in discussing the Keyes Road campus with the Verizon folks, they had informed us, and I'm not going to speak for them, maybe they can say it again, but they were not interested in the Keyes Road site because they felt that that was an insurmountable barriers to get over, and that they didn't feel that they would get enough support, and so it would be an exercise in an expensive exercise in futility. Did I do? But maybe the Verizon folks can come up and at least give you an overview.
Marcia, maybe you can answer. If something is in a historic district, is there any provision to remove that district and so it's no longer a historic district and overcome a problem? I mean, we create historic districts. I'm wondering if we can
Well,
uncreate.
the,
Yes. Well, I don't know how historic.
well, the historic districts were all created by town meeting vote and then state legislation. They have special legislation. Concord is one of a handful of communities that have special legislation for historic districts. So you would have town meeting to overcome and then legislation. So that's how you would
Okay, there is
remove.
a process.
There is a
but
process.
And is it your sense that if that process were successful, that would dramatically change the likelihood of success?
Not for the Keyes Road site, because it would still be visible from those National Historic Register sites and properties. The State Historic Preservation Officer made a point that 4 entities should comment: the Minuteman National Historical Park Superintendent, the Wild and Scenic Rivers National Park Service staff, the Historical Commission, Concord Historical Commission, and the Concord Historic Districts Commission chairs. So she was seeking the express input of those 4 organizations in making a decision about what the state's position would be.
And that would be for basically
Any new tower that would be visible.
It's not even tower. I mean, because the Concord Historical Commission did comment on the MBTA project
Yes.
because they were going to put up a series of small towers, but visible from a lot of locations. And so I think it's section 106 of this says the tower doesn't have to be located in the historic district, but if it's visible from it, it's a way to protect the view shed.
Hence the balloon test.
Right. For those churches that do have wireless communication facilities, they did go through that process. They demonstrated that it wasn't visible, it wasn't impactful to the historic district or the historic properties around them, and so they were issued that certificate of appropriateness. And then there was the Board of Appeals that they then had to proceed with. So,
Thank you for the clarification. Any other questions of the board members? The public have any
Well, I'd like to hear
comments?
from Verizon.
Verizon, yes, I'm sorry. Would you like to?
So I have questions for Verizon.
Okay. I guess we're asking you to come
Yeah.
forward. I think you'll have to share the mic if you would. Good evening, thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Sir?
And identify yourself and,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, staff, members of the community. Good evening. My name is Earl Duvall. I'm with the law firm of Duvall, Klasnick, and Thompson, and I represent Verizon Wireless.
My name is Dave Tivnan. I work for Verizon Wireless.
So,
you have a question?
I have a couple of questions, actually. So the last time we met with you, I asked the question then, and I heard something different this evening, so I just wanted to make sure I understand. One of the questions I had asked is, were you planning for the future, or is it an imminent need? And what I heard is planning for the future, that there were other companies that already serviced this district, but Verizon had gaps. And so it was, at that point, we said, were you experiencing, did you know that you were overloaded? And what I understood, or what I took away from that last conversation, was that this was a planning for the future, that you didn't have an imminent need now to fill gaps. And then all of a sudden, we have all of these complaints, and maybe the police chief explained why that came to be, that as there is more dialogue in town, people are more aware that, yeah, I'm getting my calls are being dropped. But before that conversation, there were no reports about dropped calls. There was no concern that we had heard, at least, about interference with public safety. Those, to me, feel like big concerns. And I'm just wondering what changed from the time I asked the question at the last meeting to this one, where all of a sudden we had dozens of letters, maybe more?
That's a great question. I think Kate mentioned it earlier, that when I first contacted the town, it was about 3.5 years ago, and the way I had expressed it is that the Verizon Wireless will create a project such as this, anticipating sector exhaustion, where the coverage is going to shrink and there's going to be a degradation in service to our customers. So it doesn't usually take 3.5 years to develop a macro site such as this. However, when you do work with a municipality, you obviously go through the various boards. It's the longest process as opposed to dealing with a private sector person who, let's say if the cupola building was owned by a private party, this probably would have been leased and zoned a couple of years ago. But because it did take so long, because we're going through the process, what had been predicted by our performance engineers is becoming a reality, and that is that there's a degradation in coverage because the coverage is actually shrinking. So whether it was an imminent need, we fully understand when sites will be needed, and time is allocated that hopefully a real estate guy like myself will have sufficient time to locate a site, lease a site, zone a site, and have it built so the customers never experience the type of lack of coverage that they're experiencing now.
So the reason I'm asking the question again is that we met just a couple of months ago, and it was a couple of months ago you were still planning for something to happen in the future, and that future came very much to reality almost the next day. So I'm just curious what happened from your perspective. Was there anything that changed in your service delivery or your capacity or something in the network itself that would have caused an immediate change in dropped calls? Because there were no complaints prior to that, and we're still talking about it being a future need, not an imminent need.
Well, it isn't an imminent need now. I think it wasn't
2 months ago, is my point.
Well, no, it actually was. We started this process 3.5 years ago.
No, I understand, but I asked you a couple of months ago the same question, and you said, no, we're planning for the future. Other companies had coverage in the center of town. You were looking to have the same coverage, and then almost immediately the coverage changed. And
yeah, well, I can tell you that I'm still working on 2 additional sites in town, one in West Concord, which I have not identified a viable landlord yet, and I'm also, we will be going back and contacting the school district about the high school, whether or not we're successful there or not. Hopefully we are, but I do have 2 additional sites. These sites they're obviously getting more and more difficult to get done, and they generally don't take 3.5 years, but that's the situation we're in. I hope I'm answering your question. I'm trying to do the best I can.
No, I understand. I guess I'm not understanding what changed so dramatically from 2 months ago or whenever it was that we last met, and you were planning for something that was not a problem now to being a problem for the future, and all of a sudden there's a big problem, and that didn't exist a couple of months ago. It all happened pretty recently. And how did we get from planning for the future to imminent need? That's the part that I just didn't understand.
Yeah, I don't know.
Obviously you don't know either.
Well, I can tell you that, and the coverage is, usage is up too. I mean, there are folks in the sitting here now that are actually on their iPads and whatnot using electronic devices, so the usage has gone up substantially.
Over time, but not in the last couple months. I'm
Yeah,
still
well,
trying to figure
yeah.
out what happened that caused a long-term future need to become an imminent need today.
It was predicted, 3.5 years ago.
But yes, I understand you started the process a few years ago, a couple of months ago, and I asked the question, you said you're planning for the future. And that future in 2 months became imminent today. That's my only point. So here's my other question. Are there other technologies like small cell technology that might be used rather than having a tall tower where you've concentrated power as opposed to distributed smaller? I mean, what I'm hearing from folks is that they don't want to have the big towers in their neighborhoods.
Right.
But small cell technology seems to be being deployed in a lot of cities. Is that an option that we can consider in Concord?
The short answer is no, not in this application. I would defer that question to the town RF engineer when he's present at perhaps the next time or whenever.
Discussed that when we were here.
He did establish that, I thought, right. But no, I mean, the small cells are, I'm not an RF engineer, so I'm going to speak in the best layman terms I possibly can. My understanding is for small cells is they actually, it's almost like having a fourth antenna, or fourth array, rather. Each macro site has 3 arrays covering 120 degrees. So let's say in downtown Boston, you have a problem on a street corner. You can put a small cell there that will go back to the macro site to offload or, provide coverage in difficult applications. But the small cells aren't designed to provide coverage for a whole downtown community like Concord Center. But
I think it is, though. I mean, I heard a presentation that, and the reason that City of Boston has gone to small cell is that you can't site large towers.
No.
I don't know about anything about the RF, or I'm just curious, because what they said is that the signal jumps from small cell to small cell with no interruption to the calls. The calls aren't dropped. Public safety needs are met without the need for installing a large visible pole. And they're small devices on light poles.
yeah, my understanding is small cells complement the macro site. They don't replace it.
So my question then would be, where is the closest macro site?
It'd be on the
Yeah.
map.
Can we bring up that first slide to the presentation that I gave to you? I think it's important to note that, the map that Kate,
This one, yeah.
yes, this one, that Kate had referred to, that was prepared by the town's RF consultant, and that was prepared a lot, 3 meetings ago, at least, before the last meeting that we had. So that map right there, there are 4 different sites on there. If we start at the top left, that's it's a monopole tower that's over at Nerds Neck Hill. Verizon has antennas on that at 118 feet. If we look to the right there, that's over on Bedford Street. That's a unipole, and Verizon has antennas at 90 feet. Unipole is similar to the installation that was proposed at Keyes Road. The antennas are mounted inside that pole. The bottom right, that site's actually in Lincoln. It's a lattice tower, and Verizon's at 80 feet there. And then if we look to the one to the bottom left, that's a monopole, and that's at the Emerson Hospital, and Verizon is at 87 feet there. So there are no other antennas or sites located within that area that's, in white. So there's been an issue with coverage here, for a long time. Verizon has not had reliable service in here, and when Dave says we came to the town, his site acquisition goes like this. We look at the existing sites. The RF engineers first say, is there anything we can do with those existing sites? Can we add additional antennas? Can we boost the power? What can we do to those sites to make that propagation extend further so you can get more coverage, a larger footprint? Engineers say, can't do it. In fact, the capacity, the usage is increasing so much in this area of Verizon Wireless's network that what's going to happen over the next 3 years is that those footprints are going to shrink and shrink and shrink, so that the coverage that's in the middle there, some of it used to be reliable, spotty, is going to just get worse and worse and worse. So it's something that's been going on. And this map, so, and Kate might be able to talk about this, Ivan requested from Verizon every single antenna, the make, the model on each of these sites, the height, the energy, all sorts of questions that a radio frequency engineer would ask to see how to put this, model together to, be able to do that, to do this map. I think it's important also, you reference tower. Verizon Wireless does not want to put a tower in the center of Concord. After Dave looked at those existing sites, he then went to anything that's tall. You know, where can we put things that are tall? Last time we looked at the 3 churches. Sprint's in one, T-Mobile's in one, AT&T is in one, and one has a belfry that the antennas won't fit in and they wouldn't be concealed. So those are private sites. We identified, actually Ivan, the town's expert, identified the umbrella site. And that site is right in the middle of the search ring. And, you know, the town's own, you know, bylaw says that, you know, is encouraging us, because, you know, if the board, you know, authorizes town manager to negotiate a lease for a town-owned property and we go forward, we have a long application process before the zoning board and the planning board. So, but the ordinance itself encourages the use of existing structures. You know, we went to the Emerson Field because the town asked us, we went over there, we looked at the flagpole, and the town says, could you put a flagpole here? And we're in a lot of different flagpoles, you know, call it a unipole. So we had photo simulations done of 2 different heights to that, and, you know, if that is the town's preference, then I think that, you know, Verizon Wireless would move forward with that. We think it's that installation is not as good as the cupola at the umbrella, because that is, and I think I showed pictures last time and I have them here, you know, that is 81 feet, you know, to that cupola. And, you know, putting a 81-foot pole somewhere is definitely going to be visible. When you put antennas inside that cupola, 4 different arrays, you're not going to see those. Just like the 3 churches, they're going to be not visible unless you know that they're there. So that's why we came forward with, you know, that proposal. If you go back to the second, maybe I can do it with this if I'm. So I mean, this is just a Google, you know, map. You know, here we're sitting here. Here's the umbrella. You know, you can see the different churches here, but it's this entire area that's the, you know, the search ring. There isn't a feasible spot for us to put a tower that, you know, we're going to get approved through the zoning board or the planning board. Or, you know, over here to Kai's Road, I wasn't aware of the reclassification with regards to the wetlands, but that site was way off into the back. You know, moving it up, it might not even work because of the way that DPW compound is back there. But, you know, nothing has changed historically. You know, NEPA, the National Environmental Protection Act, SHPO, the State Historic Preservation Act, and then the Historic Committee here in Concord, along with all those other folks that were going to be notified, there isn't a chance that, you know, we would succeed there, you know, with a pole. And I think the first thing that, if this was to go forward, if we were to go forward with that proposal, the first question from the zoning board is going to be, did you investigate, you know, all of the cupolas? Did you investigate anything that you could conceal these, you know, antennas in? I mean, we spoke with someone local, Jim, what's his last name? What was that guy's? Yeah. Yeah, so
White, maybe?
Yeah, Jim White, maybe. There was some other work going on, and there was potential cupola to his building, but we're only getting to 35 feet, and, you know, that wasn't, you know, that's not going to provide the height in order to satisfy the, you know, the coverage. So I know this, I apologize if I'm repetitive. I've had the opportunity to be at this mic several times, and for that, we're very grateful, and we're appreciative to the town for making so many efforts. I mean, I think after, this is going on 25 years for me, for being able to do this work, everybody who's in opposition always comes out first, and it's just I'd say in the last half a dozen years that we're starting to get a lot of people that are starting to take notice of not having service and coming out and speaking in support as much as folks had in the past with regards to opposition for visual impact. So
I think if the opposition had to do with aesthetics, I would not have nearly as much problem, but I do have a problem when we're talking about potential health. And,
Yeah, but-
I just, that creates a real difficulty, I think.
Yeah, but Mr. Chairman, if I may, and I apologize, I'm going to leave my legal hat on, under the Telecommunications Act of 1996 and under very well-established First Circuit case law, so long as the carrier demonstrates that it's in compliance with the FCC mandated levels of emissions, then the board cannot consider it or deny, an application. And, a health physicist would be retained by Verizon Wireless, would be checked by the town's consultant. It's a math formula that's, 3 pages long to determine what those RF emissions are from that antenna. And generally from one of those sites, and I'm the attorney, but according to the RF engineer, says we can install 100 sites, there, and still be well within the, limits. Until that changes, in case law or changes through the Telecommunications Act, that's what boards, are bound by.
And there's a cell site right in the church steeple right here, actually, too, so. I mean, if it's, there's three installations in 3 different churches, so it's really no different than what we're doing here. In fact, we're higher in elevation, so.
Yes.
Well, I don't mean to beat this conversation too hard, but when we looked at the map of the significant arrays and thinking about the points that Alice brought up about the repeaters, I'm just puzzled as to, given where technology has gone, I look at Main Street and I'm looking at light poles, and they would potentially go between the two. I'm not advocating, I'm just really struggling to understand why, if that works in Boston, why it can't work here.
It works in Boston because there are dozens more macro sites. Those small cell sites do not work unless they connect to a macro site. And each of these sites are macro sites. So I think as we look into the future, if a macro site is allowed in here someplace, someone's going to be back in time asking to do small cell sites in all of these areas that capacity is an issue.
They don't replace macro sites, they complement them, but not in a rural area like this, more of in a downtown area like Worcester or Boston.
Yeah, and Ivan, we did, when Ivan was here, I think for the first time, he did speak about if there was anything we could do to any of these other sites, and then whether or not a small cell site, would work. And he was saying it's not going to work for this area in the future. It's going to be a solution, an added solution. I mean, if we want, how do I say this? We want to do this as easy as possible, for you folks and for the zoning board and the planning board, and not ask for more than what is needed.
Another way of saying that, Earl, if I can interrupt you, sorry. But again, when I deal with the municipality, it is the longest and most expensive path forward for me, as opposed to working with a private property owner that owns a building. But this is the best solution. It's providing the town the service as well as the revenue, but it also happens to be the best building. It's right where we need to be. I think that's known, so.
Any other questions or comments by board members?
Sorry if I got excited,
I
Mr.
was
Chairman.
hoping you had a rabbit you could pull out of your hat or something.
Right.
But, I mean, it's a frustrating thing for all of us, I think, because there doesn't seem to be a sort of ideal solution that, when you all have a perspective on it, but they say, I think that there's significant, local opposition to it. And we do have to, or at least I feel I have to take that into account as well, so. Thank you, and I'll ask whether the
Thank you.
public
Thank you.
has some brief comments that they'd like to make. I don't know, that's up to you all, whether you'd like to. You please, yes.
Melissa McBride, 7 Everett Street. Okay. So, you've been talking about the future of it and the density, service, et cetera, in these blue areas, which are going to get worse in time. So, I'm just curious where you imagine we're going to be in 3 to 5 years. Are we going to be programming more antennas into steeples? Are we going to be back in the same place in 3 to 5 years? And I'm also just curious, because I don't use a lot of this technology, why has there been such a seemingly exponential growth in demand? I'm just curious, like, I'm not sitting there streaming things on my phone, or what probably a million people do all the time, which is why this is happening, but I just, I'll just end it there, but,
Yeah, I'll try to answer as best I can. I'm not going to, I can't, I'm not, again, I'm a real estate consultant, I'm not an RF engineer. I do know that the performance engineer division of Verizon Wireless, as well as the other carriers, fully understand how many calls are being dropped in every community throughout the country. And they anticipate when what we call sector exhaustion is anticipated, so they'll activate an open search ring to a real estate guy like myself to build these locations prior to the degradation in service, so the customers always have proper service. Consumer demand is the short answer as to why things are changing. Folks our age or older than me, or even our generation, perhaps don't all use as much as the wireless devices that the children use these days. So I hope that answers your question.
Any other comments? I think, there we go, some corrected mic. The comment or a question?
Comments mostly.
Identify yourself if you would.
Yes, I'm Sheldon Hines, 74 The Valley Road. One thing I wanted to point out is that there has been a technical error being stated by people. The coverage is not shrinking. It's the capacity that is being overwhelmed. So we've heard 2 different terms. I agree with the concept of that these existing facilities are less effective, but as was just said, it's because of the increase in use. Those blue areas, if they represent coverage, are not shrinking. It's if you were to arrive at a Sunday morning, you probably would have very little trouble having getting your phone calls through. But like before church starts on Sunday morning. The main thing I would like to say is that satisfying Verizon's request for a facility in Concord Center is a short-term solution for the town, because there are other carriers who also have inadequate coverage in town. And under the Telecommunications Act, we have to be fair to the other carriers as well. I haven't heard any mention of whether the existing facilities of the other carriers are adequate in Concord Center. This needs to be considered as well by the town boards. It's also not true that the Telecommunication Act requires that there be full coverage and capacity everywhere that a carrier wishes there to be. It specifically mentions in the Telecommunication Act and in the case law that small areas of lack of coverage and capacity are okay, because it's never possible to cover every basement, every alley, and that's well recognized. However, you can see that that is a big gap there, and I'm willing to admit that that's a big gap.
Thank you.
And so I don't think that we're going to get away with just having one facility on a flagpole or in a cupola in Concord Center in the long run, and this is going to come back to haunt us. And something needs to be done with inside a building that is perhaps a new building, perhaps at Kai's Road, that will satisfy this requirement. And rather than trying to talk about new towers, we're looking at cupolas. And that's something the town should consider. Can it add an occupied tower at Kai's Road, perhaps, in which the top level would have hidden antennas? This should be very seriously considered. Thank you.
Thank you.
Stuart Weeks, 100 Newbury Court. Thank you for the opportunity to comment. I think there's another health issue here that we're not looking at, and I appreciate those are the concerns that have been raised, but there's a larger health issue. I think we're on a slippery slope, and I don't know how
I
many
want you to make your comments, though, to the Verizon cell. That's what we're here to discuss.
That's what I'm seeking to do, Tom.
Although we can't also, we are not permitted to make a decision about siting a tower on health concerns. That's explicitly excluded from the Telecommunications Act, under which a decision of when and where to site a tower is controlled. So you started your conversation that you want to talk about health concerns. We can't do anything about that.
Yeah, and the reason I mentioned is because I understood from the police chief and the fire chief that they're health concerns if someone, has a emergency need. So I'm picking up on that. I'm responding to that.
You're talking about emergency needs, calls being dropped in emergency situations.
Yeah, if that's clear. That's what I understood. I understood a concern is people could, suffer. We can't provide the coverage. I understood that to be a health issue that was brought forward. So I'm simply trying to say that there are other health issues. And I think it'll become clear. I'll finish up, but I don't know what I was going to say is I don't know how many people here consider themselves to be experts, but I wanted to read some words by the former CEO of Microsoft Canada who addressed this issue, which goes beyond health. He said, the more research I did on the wireless industry, the more I became concerned. I attended, with Health Canada and Industry Canada, our local council. I was amazed at the lack of interest in hearing of any concerns from the community. The Industry Canada folks were there just to quiet everybody. So I continued my research, and I realized that in my career I've seen the tremendous benefits that technology can provide, but I've also seen what can happen if it is not implemented properly. And after my investigation and my analysis, I came to the conclusion, again, this is a former CEO of Microsoft Canada, an expert, and my question was, I don't know how many of us consider ourselves experts, but has gone into this at great length. After my investigations and my analysis, I came to the conclusion that our implementation of wireless technology is not safe, period, full stop. My point is, I think we're on a slippery slope. There are regions that are taking down cell towers for health reasons that have actually gone into the research and have the effects. The other point I wanted to mention in this respect is despite the fact that the Federal Communications Commission, FCC, and the telecom industry assure us that the amount of EMF radiation we're all exposed to is safe, the telecom industry spent $50 million lobbying our elected representatives, public servants, and government officials for the passage of the Telecommunications Act, which grants them total immunity from any liability. They have absolutely no accountability over the safety of their product. Many communities find themselves in the situation where they're unable to tell telecom companies to remove any kind of wireless services, we heard a little of this tonight, based on health issues, if the companies stay compliant with FCC guideline. And this is a point. Those guidelines, safety standards, were not only issued over 20 years ago, in August 1st of 1996, the beginning of our cell phone use, but they were set at the upper limits that were determined to be safe for human health. Cell phones and EMF radiation are now everywhere. We're in the midst of what is referred to as a thick EMF soup, and the standards have not been updated in 2 decades. So on behalf of our children who can't speak for themselves, and I conclude with this comment, having taken but a portion of the time that we've heard from the gentleman in front of me. This is a comment by Chris Wollums, who's the editor of Integrated Cancer and Oncology News. And I offer this on behalf of our children and the generations to come. In a world where a drug cannot be launched without proof that it is safe, where the use of herbs and natural compounds available to all since early Egyptian times are now questioned, their safety subjected to the deepest scrutiny, where new food cannot be launched without prior approval, the idea that we can introduce Wi-Fi in mobile phones without restrictions around our 5-year-olds is double standards gone mad. So again, thank you that we can have this time for comment. I think we're on a slippery slope. I offer those comments.
I don't think I'm doing a very good job of enforcing our 2-minute rule, but does anybody else want to make a comment?
Non-health.
Not on health, right.
Julie Del Sproul, 18 Barkus Farm Road. Marcia might be the best one to answer this, but I had a question about the design that was shown to the historic folks, because was it, I think Verizon had referred to this, but a monopole that was with internally mounted, so it looked just like a flagpole, because I think Marcia had said that the historic folks had objected to the design. But if it looked just like a flagpole, say you wanted to erect a flagpole, United States flag at the Kais Road site, would they object to that as well?
That's what was proposed.
Thank you. She's going to answer it.
Marcia Rasmussen, the design was a flagpole, was a monopole. It was the the antenna were going to be installed within the pole itself. It was because it was going to be visible and because of the height. Those were the reasons, in addition to the effect on the historic properties.
Thank you.
So basically, you can't put anything. Is that what we're to believe?
That's visible from...
Anything visible, even if it's the United States flag.
Jack McBride, 57 Everett Street. 2 points. One, I think the question of health absolutely cannot be considered in the permitting process, but I think the leasing of town property is outside of the permitting, so you probably have a little more leeway without getting in trouble. And then I do think the visibility, visible from is not the criteria in the NHP or the Section 106 review. It's impact upon. And so I think I certainly respect Marcia and her efforts, and I in no way want to suggest that they didn't do a comprehensive job, and I can imagine she dreads the idea, and the town does, to go back and try to do it again. And I respect that. But I do think that initially the National Historic, or the Concord Historic Commission reviewed it and voted by a majority that it wouldn't have a substantial detrimental impact, even though it would be visible. That was changed, and the Historic Districts Commission denied it. So I think there's a little bit of room here. It's your purview, and certainly I'm not trying to put additional work onto the town, but when I hear this, I think at least we need to understand the criteria is not visible from. Thank you.
Thanks. Anybody else, or thank you? Oops, I guess we do have.
Alicia Boyajian, 33 Stowe Street. I just wanted to add that I think something that has changed substantially from that first application for Kai's Road is that there is significant resident support for the site. And I did speak very briefly with the State Historical Commission office with Linda Santoro, who is a preservation planner there, and she did very clearly say that resident support would be weighed in their decision to deny or approve an application. So far, we're actually up to 110 signatures from Concord that would support siting at Kai's Road. So I feel like that is worth exploring further.
Thank you.
Hi, Ed Boyajian, 33 Stowe Street. I'll try to keep this to 2 minutes, I promise. But I feel like I'm at a loss, and I feel like there's this ever-increasing gap on this topic, and I find it frustrating. We don't, unlike Verizon, we don't come with our lawyers, and we come as just citizens with the best of our knowledge. But I think there is an ever-growing and an accelerating gap, and I think it's a gap that is represented by time. It's a gap between what we believed and what we knew back in 1996, the often quoted references by the good work that Ms. Rasmussen did in 2006 in citing that. When our town bylaws were established to determine the setback limits, the proper setback limits, which were done also, I believe, over 10 years ago. And although it's much a debated topic, our collective understanding of the health-related issues to cell towers in our life and in our world. And so, look, I think those gaps increasingly create a gap between town officials, town government, and citizens. And I don't think it's because of bad intent. I've learned in my life that people, when armed, reasonable people, when armed with a similar portfolio of data, shockingly come to common conclusions. Not always, but most of the time. And I think therein lies the hardest part of what we have to do. And so how do we fill that gap? Because I think that gap, as much as we feel like we're closing it at times in these forums, I still feel like that gap is there, and I at times feel like it continues to increase. And so how do we fill the gap? And I think it's very simple. We have to do the work. And the work is hard. The work involves going back to the State Historic Commission, not accepting the standards that led us here that may be dated from 2006 and 1996 to be what define how we make our decisions today. And I think that work is really hard. And, the good thing about this town and the citizens here in Concord is you've got a lot of really interested, thoughtful people who are trying desperately to do some of this work with you. But we need you to participate in that work too. And so I would ask you to formally ask people in town government to study the science. I didn't believe any of it. I mean, I live in the same house with someone who's passionate about it, and I was not there. But I studied the science, and it changed me, changed how I thought about it. So to that end, I'd ask you, so what's the work look like? Do the work. Study the science. I'd ask that the Select Board, the Planning Commission, the Historic District Commission, the Board of Health, the ZBA, the town manager and assistant town manager, and the Natural Resources Commission, I guess the school committee too, do the reading. Study, do the study before we do anything. Just study it. You don't have to make any decision based on it, but we should at least have a common frame of reference. So when we have these conversations and feel like we're talking past each other. And then recognize, and I understand too, we have to balance the risk. It's not just a risk for health of citizens. We got the other issues that I think both the fire chief and police chief just said so clearly. But I just want to make one other statement. With great deference to Verizon, they have a job to do, but their mission is very simple and very clear. They need to improve coverage in town as needed, and they need to do it to put those towers where we let them. And candidly, again, with great deference, Verizon's opinion about aesthetics aren't relevant to this discussion. It's only relevant where it can go mechanically. That's it. So we come to these meetings and those comments get made, but they shouldn't be relevant to this discussion.
Let's wrap it up.
I'm done.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank
But I
you.
oppose the placement. I oppose the placement at Stowe Street, and I am absolutely for fighting through the hard issues and doing the work to get this placed in the DPW yard.
Thank you. I would only sort of end this by saying that we're not the only community, we're not the only place, we're not the only state that is having this issue. It is being looked at nationally, statewide, and all over, but we are the ones who do have the issue of public safety to consider, because we're the ones responsible for that directly. So I do want to say how much I appreciate Verizon coming, because I know that it's uphill and a lot of tough questions, but I think you've answered them very directly, and I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We now move on to item 8, which is the Punkatasset parking update.
If you would.
Please.
I don't think we've had the pleasure of meeting Chris.
And I'm going to introduce you. My name is Rich Rain, Public Works Director. I'm joined by Chris Albrock. Chris is the new town engineer. I say new, but Chris has been in town for 10 years.
Yeah, going on
working
10 in December.
Working in the capacity as
a cold, so.
Public Works engineer, as well as assistant town engineer for the past 3 years.
Welcome to the new position, and at least becoming a familiar face to us.
Thank you. Very exciting. I appreciate the opportunity.
Would you like me to start?
Please.
So, Mr. Chair and Board, we've been working with the neighborhood group's representative on the Punkatasset project, the parking project, for some time now. Included in your packet is a memo from Mr. Doleski and Mr. Burke. That's the project representatives from the neighborhood group. It was dated July 30th, and it makes some recommendations on how to potentially deal with the parking issue on Monument Street. We provided a response to that proposal in which we expressed some concerns. It's detailed in our comment letter, and that was also included in your packet, I believe.
Yep.
And one of the main concerns we have is with the 11-foot travel lane width. We provided some references, both the MUTCD, which is a Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices, and the AASHTO Green Book. Although Mr. Doleski has made some reference to that also, we take into account some other issues related to some curvature of the roadway, which lead us to those concerns that it probably is not an appropriate location to narrow the roadway to 11-foot travel lanes.
The concern is basically a safety concern.
We believe it's a safety concern. We believe it's not just safety of vehicles, but it's also pedestrians as well as potentially cyclists on that roadway. So we think there's a better solution. We've met with the neighborhood group, and we're supportive of some solution there. We think that you probably recall when we had this conversation a handful of months ago, we talked about the relocation of the wall, and we thought that was necessary to achieve what we were, trying to construct the improvement. And that wall, if we look at the we got proposed parking plan there, you can see the wall pretty much along the back side at space 1 and 2, but it's more pronounced at 3, 4, 5, and throughout that whole area. The right-of-way extends pretty much to another 3 feet or so beyond that wall, and we believe that we have the adequate room to remove that wall and place it about 3.5 feet to the edge of right-of-way, which would then allow for the parking stall to be increased in size, and it would actually allow the ingress and egress from the passenger side door without parking on the in the travel lane. We think that that lane width is consistent with the engineering standards based on the average daily traffic on that roadway, as well as the travel speeds on that roadway. And by doing this, we believe that we can create somewhere in the neighborhood of 6 to 7 spaces. We would look at space number 1 and 2. The furthest south, space number 1 would be dropped. There's a stopping sight distance issue with that, and we would then have 2 be the first space in the configuration. 3, 4, 5, and 6, we would actually have 3 spaces in there, and then 7, 8, and 9, we would have 2 spaces in there. So we may be able to get 3 in that 7, 8, and 9 area, but there is some public shade trees that may present some limitations to that. So we think based on a removal of or relocation of the wall to the edge of right-of-way, some reconfiguration of the spaces, some removal of some smaller, brush and volunteer trees there, very small diameter, and there is probably 2 trees which would be considered public shade trees, not the large oaks that are in place there, but a couple smaller 4 to 5 inch caliper trees would have to be removed, and we would require a public shade tree hearing for those. We believe that we can create somewhere in the neighborhood of 6 to 7 on-street spaces. Anything, Chris, to add on that?
No, I think you captured everything.
Okay.
Mike Lawson did send something to me regarding this. He says, I was very hopeful that more than 6 parking spots would be possible along Monument Street. I believe that given the way we address the overall parking situation, we constrained the number of parking spots along Estabrook Road because we were committed to expand the parking at Punkatasset and to provide a few spots at Monument Farm. If we go ahead with this plan, I hope that it will be with the recognition that this was not our original intent and that we will view this situation as only temporary if parking becomes an issue. We will again explore expanding parking along Monument Street to be in line with our earlier position. And I think I attended the meeting that with the neighborhood about the parking, and I tried to make that point that this is something that we would have to monitor to be sure. But at this point, the hope is that, and the expectation is that this would provide sufficient parking for access, and the amount of usage of Estabrook Woods has decreased recently. So we will see what happens on that. Any board members have questions or comments about this?
I'm glad that Mike brought the issues up that he did in his letter, because having been the liaison to the Estabrook Woods Parking Access Study Committee, which met for a very long period of time to wrestle with exactly this issue, not just at Punkatasset, but at all the entrances to Estabrook. Many things have changed since then, so I'm not going to dredge out the report and try and align the findings that that committee brought to the select board, because the situation has changed. But I would agree that if this is the path that we go forward in, that we do stay mindful of the goal, which was to give the public access. And if the solutions we're achieving don't, that we need to come back and put our heads to our pens to paper again, which is not necessarily saying I have a solution at Punkatasset or any one of the sites, but that I don't want to lose sight of the work that other volunteers in this town did for a long period of time to try and wrestle this. And so, thanks.
If I may, Mr. Chair, can I just make...
Please, yes.
The spaces that we're proposing in the first phase, call-in, are the easy spaces. We think that that is something that is a fairly light lift, and we've actually even proposed that Concord Public Works can take on that project ourselves using internal forces, possibly this fall or spring, depending on their competing priorities. I think when you go beyond those spaces, you're looking at different grade changes that make it a lot more complicated and probably a lot more costly for their wall relocation, as well as potentially some grading and larger tree removals that would require some retaining walls. So the first 6 or 7 spaces I think we can get fairly easily. The other ones are going to be more complicated. I just want to get that on the record.
But I appreciate it. I think overall your focus has also been on public safety,
Right.
where I think it should be. So, is there any other comments from the board members?
So I guess I do. If this plan is the one that goes forward, because it seems like from an engineering perspective, it's the most reasonable. We'd like to see more spaces, we just can't fit them in without a considerable amount more work here. Have we considered whether there's any opportunity to include some parking on the other side of the street as well? If as our phase 2, if, you know, people who are going for walks in the woods are okay about walking a little further to get to those woods, it's about being outside and walking. Is it a possibility that we look at parking on the opposite side of Monument Street to add a few more spaces? Is that?
That wasn't part of our charge. We wanted to
No.
look exactly at the existing spaces that were being used and looking
Yeah.
at potentially formalizing those. We certainly can look at the right-of-way distance, grading, seeing if that's something, you know, either north of the spaces that we're talking about or directly across in some area. So that can be looked at. I wouldn't preclude that from the review.
I'm just worrying that, you know, if this is the design that goes forward, falls far short of what the goal was for the number of vehicles that would be able to park safely. So I'm anticipating that this is a great phase 1 option, and that we need to look forward to a possible expansion somewhere else. Appreciate the work that went into this. I know you had a lot of meetings back and forth with the citizens, with the engineer, with the conversations about what was possible. So I appreciate the thoroughness in this review and, you know, presenting something that looks like it's reasonable and buildable.
Public have any comments? Seeing none, thank you very much.
So what is the process for moving forward? Will we move forward in this direction, or shall we put it on hold for right now?
Yes,
I think the department has said they could manage what was just described in-house either this fall or in the spring, and so I think they need some instruction. Would you like them to proceed with the planning, or?
I would say
Seems to
yes.
me like we're ready to go. We've talked about it.
I really think we've looked at this, and now we have a good set of drawings that show us what's feasible and buildable. I feel like this is a good step for us to take.
Well, and I also understand that this really does have the support. I mean, this is kind of the process we'd like to see go forward. It has the support of the abutters, and it's the result of very collaborative work. So I don't see any reason why we'd want to hold up on taking a step.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Linda, is that your sense?
I agree, yeah, I
Do you think
definitely
we
agree.
need a motion, or is this sufficient?
That'd be great. I think that it'd be appreciated if you just approve in concept what was discussed here. The board supports that. And they'll-
Just make something up there, Linda?
I move to accept the conceptual plan offered by the Department of Public Works for the Pocketasset parking.
Second?
That is 6 or 7 within your discretion, and based on.
Well, we're going to max it out,
Yeah.
maximum of 7, but
Yeah.
we may
Right.
get 6. That's what our goal is.
We have a second to that. All those in favor?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much.
I will say that we will have a public shade tree hearing for those, and if it's objected, it needs to come back to you.
Okay, great.
Thank you for the word to the wise, yes.
Really appreciate
Can
it.
I just compliment the two of them, both Chris and Rich, because this was not on their list of projects they were intending to achieve, and they're short an engineer, they have Cambridge Turnpike and a lot of other projects. to work on, so
As I
thank
said in my comments, I think also the public needs, the people who Punkatasset Parking Group did an excellent job of trying to work with the town and arriving at a solution rather than having conflict, and that's appreciated as well.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Best of luck in your new position.
Nice seeing you again.
Discuss next steps for the 2030 long-range plan. And again, Mike has a comment. Long-range plan, I'd like to see us either devote an entire select board. Oops.
We You passed over the public-private partnership
Oh,
discussion,
I'm
which,
sorry.
which
Oh,
I
Tom.
appreciated.
That was not something I
Tom,
want to do.
how did that happen?
No,
I was
that's,
going to ask you if you would skip over that, because I'm not, once again, for the third time, I'm not prepared. I had intended to spend Thursday and Friday, and I ended up spending time on the letter to the governor about the town meeting, so I apologize.
Can I ask, did the light change in here?
Yes.
Ah, thank you. I'm having,
It got darker, right?
yeah, I was just wondering if we were having a brownout.
Verizon has nothing to do with our lighting.
I was not about to suggest it. I was thinking there was a dimmer switch I hadn't known about in our, hopefully reconfigured space.
So I guess my skipping over was serendipitous of the year.
Formally skipping over.
But yes, I think we'll, unfortunately, we'll have to defer that until the next.
Thank you.
So now, the 2030 long-range plan, and Mike commented, I would like to see us either devote an entire select board meeting to this topic or schedule a special select board meeting for the purpose of discussing this important report. I don't know whether anybody has any particular thoughts at this point. I think Mike made it quite a endeavor to sort of get our hands around it, I think, and I think it probably does make sense that we have a more extended discussion. We've got a fairly busy night tonight, but if there are immediate items that people feel we need to focus on tonight, I'm certainly happy to consider that.
Having spent a good deal of time over the last year as the liaison to the long-range plan, I can't pick one issue that is more or less important, except to the extent that any one of the points made in the long-range plan would impact our positions at special town meeting. In other words, would they encourage or discourage any actions? And I can't think, I mean, the only thing I would pull out of the long-range plan that I know of is a continuingly strong indication of the need to really tackle affordable housing in town. And I think that we're looking at items at the special town meeting that are aimed at that. Don't know how we're going to decide on it, but that's good. I think that it deserves a full meeting. It certainly took the time.
That was one of the reasons that we had item 5, Liz, to discuss the affordable housing tonight, because...
But I just wanted to put it within the capstone of the long-range plan.
So I'm happy to spend some time at a meeting talking about it, but I have to say that we've always operated under a long-range plan for the town, and we've always had a list of priorities that the town departments first look at. They review what's doable in any given time or any given year. So the question that I'd be asking our board is, are there things that would raise a particular item to the top of the list that we would say are board goals for the town manager to oversee an implementation of in the short term? And so, because I think the town departments really use this as their guiding list of how they're going to implement the goals and aspirations of the town. So for us to talk about it is great. We each took a piece of this, you remember. We each read a section, commented, we all read each other's comments as well. So it's not like it's a foreign document, but we don't have an actual to-do on this unless it's to, and I think we already did accept the report formally. Yes. I'm happy to have an open discussion about what we like or don't like, but it's now a document that's been accepted. It's had numerous public hearings and public meetings about. So at this point, I'm almost thinking it belongs in the purview of the town departments to start setting priorities of what things they can operate on now. As the Public Works voted at their not this past meeting, but the one before, to look at the Complete Streets program and adopted a Complete Streets. This is something that was in the comprehensive long-range plan, and they've now taken the first step of adopting it. We don't have a to-do except to support the we voted to support the Public Works Commission's decision to move forward with the complete streets. So I'm happy to have a conversation. I don't know if we need a full board meeting of 2 hours of discussion about this. I'm happy to participate if you think that that's necessary.
I know the planning board also has kind of gone and made a set of priorities.
Including possible zoning changes for consideration next spring.
So I guess the main issue might be we should probably consider, are there items that we think there might be warrant articles out of this?
That's what I was imagining, and I don't know that I can say that that was the review I took when I read my portion, or I would like the time to look through it. And, but that's on me.
So, I hear all the comments that have been made and all the work that's gone into this, and it's true, a lot of this is will be driven by the town manager and the boards, the individual boards and departments. But we could find ourselves in the same situation that we have been in previously, where there are some, just because of the strength of the boards perhaps, or the strength of the, or just what rises to the top because of the way things work. I'm sorry, I don't know how to
I know what you mean, though.
zero in on this. But we could find ourselves in the position again where there are some areas that never seem to come to the top and get dealt with at a department level and or at a town meeting level in terms of seeing visible action that will facilitate getting various goals done. So that's my only concern, that somehow, maybe it means we, through the town manager, we have some visibility on the priorities that are at the top for each of the departments in terms of what they're tackling on that relates to the long-term plan, so that we can see ourselves, where the balance is, or where the priorities are, or...
Well, the date for the evaluation that they sent out to the citizens, do you expect that back by the 15th, is it, or remember what date that's?
Later in October.
Later in October, and that doesn't really directly address, but something may come of that will advise us as to priorities that the citizens of the town might have. I guess what I'm hearing is that the thought is it may make sense to put this off and have Mike available, and but probably as part of our homework to review and think about particular items in that particular areas that we handled before. I guess that gets us down to the warrant articles. I think they are in our packet. I think there were two items. One of the speakers list and time assignments.
So the moderator was asking last week if, on what articles does the board wish to make a statement so that she can allocate time, and it wasn't clear to me what articles members wish to speak on. And the moderator can always report to the board that the select board supports this article, and you don't have to get up and speak, but there may be articles that you wish to speak on.
I think I'm going to be introducing the town manager search appropriation of funds, so that that clearly is one that I think the select board should be.
So on the second page, under, it looks like this is the list of what the moderator understands to be the plan. So for Article 8, what we have you down as the primary speaker with 3 minutes. Hopefully that's enough. But, and I don't know if there are other articles, W.R. Grace or the White Pond.
So I would like to make, if possible, even if it's just for a 1-minute statement about White Ponds, because I feel like the opportunity is enormous for the town, and I'd like the opportunity to thank the White Pond Association. We've been working on this for 6 years, and we're working on some sort of,
a little history would be valuable, because I do see that where there's a number of emails and questionings coming in about kind of the funding and what's going to happen and who's in charge and that type of thing. And I think we've done a good job of answering those, but the answers have gone more directly to the people who've asked the questions rather than the general public.
So should we put you down?
I would like to be put down for 2 minutes at most. I'll try to do it under that, but.
For Article 4.
Yep.
Anybody else have?
I'm happy to speak briefly on the state grant for transit services, appropriation of funds. Right now, I see that Marcia Rasmussen is the primary speaker, which I assume she's going to give us some history. I don't think I'm going to need a lot of time, maybe a minute.
Linda, what is your sense on Article 12, the library development? In Maine, and Liz is going to, I think, be the one.
Russ is going to make the main presentation.
Yep.
And I mean, I think she does a tremendous job.
She
so
does,
there's no-
she does, and she's in the best position,
Yeah.
I think, in terms of the regional role and working with all of them, so, all of the groups.
Not any real need, but if you'd like to, obviously, for you could. I don't know whether, it's a little hard, I don't want to raise the legal services appropriation of funds, raise sort of an issue if it's not raised, but I'm certainly happy to speak if it appears to be necessary. So I'll prepare to but leave it kind of and see how it goes.
Are there any other the articles that you imagine we should really try and
Well, the primary purpose for the special town meeting is the first 3 articles, the
Right.
W.R. Grace settlement. So if a member wanted to speak on probably Article 1, I think 2 and 3.
If you think it's useful, I'm happy to be as part of the negotiating team.
Yeah.
A 1-minute comment on the process and why. I'm sure you're going to talk about the amount of the settlement, but the process of the settlement, I could say a word or two.
Great.
We started from a very high number and came down to a very low number, which is a good deal for the town, is the general statement.
That's
But I
great,
can do
because you
that.
have a unique space there, Alice.
Yes.
I'll do that one.
Yes, the only other one, whether the supplemental appropriation for the police department, that is, okay, I see, so Laurie Hunter they have for a couple of minutes, so that's good, so we don't need, okay. That-
Do we know if anybody from the school committee is going to want to comment on that or not?
Don't know, haven't heard. Lori didn't indicate that anybody from the school committee was going to.
Okay.
I think they have a school committee meeting tomorrow?
Tomorrow, yes.
Right, so I assume that they'll go through the same process that we are. And do you think the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail grant of easement needs any support, or?
That's just an easement,
I know, I don't see where, and Marcia's more than capable, along with you.
But it feels like that's just, it's granting it, we've granted easements numerous
It
times.
includes a request for an appropriation of
Appropriation
funds of
of funds.
$25,000, I think,
Right.
to purchase, if necessary, the easements, but still, the town's been supportive of the easements consistently.
Right. Well, I could be convinced if you think we should make.
My sense is that one of the bigger concerns about the special town meeting is that there's been a request for funds, and kind of the timing of it, whether it was necessary, and it doesn't seem to me that the Bruce Street Rail Trail would raise that issue. It's necessary in order to give the easement, in order for the rail trail to progress. So there's kind of a fairly logical basis to that. Should we then just go and
Positions on the
take
article?
positions?
Yeah.
The first is the eminent domain settlement, 214 Wine Main Street, additional compensation.
Affirmative action.
Affirmative action.
I fully agree. And thank you, Alice, and,
Yes.
and Tom, and Chris, and everybody else, because I think we ended up in a place that was really quite positive.
Linda, I take that's affirmative from you?
It is.
So, for the financial articles, it's the board's practice to say recommend affirmative action on Article 1 in the amount of $300,000, the appropriation, and there's several of those that require that, if that's the board's wish.
Well, given that it could have been a very different number, I happily recommend affirmative action in the amount of $300,000.
We just can do this, but we don't have to have motions on each of these, or do we?
Practice has been for you to vote.
Okay. Linda, do you want to make that motion?
If I'm up to speed with what you just did here, I was busy signing something. I make a motion that the board recommend affirmative action in the amount of $300,000 for Article number 1. Is that good?
Yep, second.
All in favor?
Aye.
The second is eminent domain settlement, 214 Wine Main Street, Concord, and 37 Knox Trail, Acton, grant of easement. I would
move affirmative action.
I agree.
I agree.
I agree.
We'll need a motion then?
I make a motion that we recommend affirmative action to grant an easement for 214 Y Main Street, Concord, and 37 Knox Trail, action.
As printed in the warrant.
As printed in the warrant.
You got a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Third is eminent domain settlement, zoning bylaw amendment of 214 Y Main Street. Affirmative action?
I would actually recommend affirmative action on this for the board.
Okay, I would as well.
You need that as a motion?
Yes.
I move that we recommend affirmative action on Article, this is now Article 3, which is a zoning bylaw amendment to allow emergency vehicular or pedestrian access over land owned by the town to access the adjacent property.
Second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Then we get to the White Pond Association, gift of real estate. You think affirmative action?
It would be a great honor to recommend affirmative action on the acceptance of a gift of real estate.
I think you should motion immediately.
I did.
Second.
I move to. I am moved to.
All those in favor?
Aye.
White Pond appropriation of funds for beach operation.
Requested amount is $30,000, and again, this is so that the Recreation Department can begin the process of printing beach stickers and hiring lifeguards and doing training and so forth before opening the beach on Memorial Day.
And so if we didn't do it now, we wouldn't be able to open.
You could vote in April, it'd be mid-April, and they would not have been able to do any hiring and probably printing and that, so some of the things that we
Timing
would
is off.
want to do.
Yeah.
Would,
And we're, $30,000 is probably not gonna break the bank. Get affirmative action?
So I would move affirmative act, that we recommended for affirmative action for $30,000 for the operations of the White Pond bathing beach for the summer beginning May 2019. Come on, years wrong.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Concord Carlisle Regional High School capital improvements.
Do we have to take this position?
You can, sometimes the board makes its opinion known at town meeting, or, you know, otherwise you typically do take a position on all articles, and the requested amount, is it 100,000?
Yes.
And this is for what in particular? Do we?
This is for making improvements at the regional high school for known issues such as drainage on the lower fields, spray booth in the theater areas when they make sets for theater.
And this wasn't part of their budget? That's my only question. Well, why is this coming to a special town meeting as opposed to their operating budget that was approved in April? Like new capital needs came up from April?
Well, they had an article on the warrant for April, but it didn't have it wasn't properly written in a manner that would have allowed them to do these kinds of things. It was limited to the paving driveway.
They were doing I thought that was having to do with the landfill site.
Right, and this is not.
This is not. So this is like new capital. These were not considered when they voted for their annual budget of capital improvements needed at the school. I'm not going to argue that they shouldn't do capital improvements. It's just an odd thing to bring to a special town meeting, is what would be a line item appropriation of the budget. And these are things that they don't need, they think they need to fund and do now, as opposed to wait for next year's annual budget.
I assume this is a timing issue versus carrying it to April.
I also have a hunch that they wouldn't have called a special town meeting just for these items.
No, yeah.
So I think that kind of is, one of the concerns is that when you call, and actually, I've got to lead Mike, when you call a special town meeting, how do you limit the number of warrant articles that pop up as a result? And Mike wrote to me, I support the articles submitted by the town and do not have an opinion about other articles. However, I strongly believe that only articles that are essential to the effective functioning of the town should be included on a special town meeting warrant. Submission of other articles, either by individual citizens or by other committees, should be, as we did with the petition article, be discouraged. That being said, I do not believe articles should, at this late date, be withdrawn or not moved at the special town meeting. And I think he's got a point. I don't know whether the moderator is the one who needs to also reiterate or somehow get this message across. I think when there is a need for a special town meeting, as clearly there was in particularly with the W.R. Grace, but I think also White Pond issue, you do open it up a little bit.
I don't think that we can sit.
Prohibit.
We know, it's an open, the warrant's open. I'm not going to sit in judgment as to what the timing was or whether or not the schools could have waited. I'm not conversant enough in their thinking, so I don't see any reason why I wouldn't be supportive of that. But
well, in my sense, I mean, I don't think these are kind of minor, irrelevant matters. They're all matters that, if they're not done at the special town meeting, they were going to be doing it at the
Right.
regular meeting. So while I agree with Mike and I agree with the people who have written to us being concerned about this, I guess I would be in favor of affirmative action.
Fine. I could go with that.
Wildly enthusiastic, huh? Linda, are you as enthusiastic?
Well, Laurie Hunter at the public hearing, I think, did attempt to explain why this ended up on the, this particular
Yeah.
warrant. So, again, I don't have any reason to refute that at this point.
Well, I do have to also own the fact that I have a daughter in the public school system, so I have a vested interest in their,
Making sure that the showers are
making sure,
repaired.
exactly, exactly.
Perhaps you should recuse yourself from the vote then.
But do we have a motion to take affirmative action?
I recommend that the select board recommend affirmative action on article number 6 as printed in the warrant,
The amount of $100,000.
in the amount of $100,000.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And then we also, the next is Concord Carlisle Capital Feasibility Study. Again, this one I have a little bit more of a difficulty in because we're talking about a study, and I'm not clear that if the study were put off until the whole town had an opportunity. I mean, I think the assumption in special town meetings did not get the activity among citizens the same way that the regular town meeting does. And this one is for $200,000, so we're also talking about substantially more money. I mean, doubling the amount of all the others except for the additional compensation on the eminent domain matter. But
Well, this is a capital,
The feasibility study.
yeah,
that actually does now address additional parking, potential uses for the landfill area, roadway, and lighting improvements, field improvements, and I would assume, based on the fact that they brought it to special town meeting, that that's because they'd like to have this underway before annual town meeting. But I do that without any knowledge of the fact. I assume that there's a timing interest.
And so, I'm persuaded by your earlier comment that once you open the warrant, you have the opportunity that anyone can bring something forward. It could be a citizen petition, it could be the school committee. I'm surprised this isn't part of their operating budget to do a feasibility study. We had a lengthy discussion before the last town meeting about potential uses of the landfill site.
Yeah.
And just a couple of months later, they were looking for a feasibility study, what to do with the landfill site. But,
it surprised me somewhat if they're gonna be able to have, I mean, the warrant articles for the April meeting are due in,
The deadline is January 4th. I think we asked they be submitted in mid-December.
I wouldn't think they're going to have the $200,000 feasibility study completed in 2 months.
Wouldn't that be nice?
I think they might get the RFP out.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I guess on this one, I see less of a urgency to support it, and I'd rather get more of the town input, so I would be less inclined.
So you're saying you would like to take a position at town meeting?
That I would kind of defer the select board taking affirmative action on this.
So
At this
versus
time.
no action, would you rather take it at town meeting?
Oh, yeah.
So, the time, putting something on the warrant
Yeah.
is not within our purview.
Yeah.
It's on the warrant, and now we get to, whether we support this article as written, or we can we can discuss it and, again, I'm not sure our discussion will lead us to a different outcome
Well, we will have one other input. Mike would be there. So,
Did he have, did he
he
raise
did
a-
not have any specific, as he said, he felt more that he didn't take a position on it.
Well, will you be attending the school committee meeting tomorrow? Because I'm wondering if you might have greater,
Clarity at
Clarity.
that point. Unfortunately, I will not be.
okay. So,
It sounds like, I was hearing that we should make the recommendation at the town meeting. Is that,
So we defer until town meeting?
I think that gives us some opportunity to talk about,
You're posted for a meeting at 6:30 on the night
Yeah.
of town meeting if you want to discuss it there. You can also listen to the debate on the floor and then decide amongst yourselves whether you want to support it.
Okay.
So no need for a vote if you're going to
I
defer.
think we have a comment
yes.
from somebody who might have information about this.
Robert Brown, Milton Circle, member of the school committee, speaking on my own behalf. The finance committee is going to have a meeting this Thursday, and I believe we'll discuss the two articles.
okay.
Correct. And superintendent's going to make a presentation, so you may want to.
Yeah, I will be at that.
Great,
Refer to
that would be
that.
helpful.
Yeah.
okay, good.
So let's delay our vote till we have more information.
Great.
I'd like to hear what the FinCom's questions are and what they decide.
Next item is the town manager search appropriation of $20,000.
Oh, I don't think we could possibly move in agreement.
I'm in favor of that.
Yeah, so am I.
Who wants to make the motion?
I recommend that the select board recommend affirmative action of article number 8 in the amount of $20,000.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Sorry.
Police Department fiscal year 2019 supplemental appropriation in the amount of $48,000. Looking for a position for middle school.
Correct. This is converting the youth coordinator resigned her position earlier in the summer. We have a grant of $17,000 from the community chest that supported that position. Those funds will revert back to the community chest in December, I think, at the end of the calendar year, if the money isn't used. So that's part of why the police chief thought it was important to bring it forward at this time, because those funds would be lost, and there's an opportunity to use the Muse stabilization fund. So there's no appropriation from taxation this year. Eventually, when the Muse funds go away, there would be requirement contribution from the general fund.
And I don't have a reason not to be supportive of this. I guess I continue to be curious as to why this position, which used to be in the social services of the town, is being moved under the purview of the police department.
With the position always worked, Jennifer Clark always worked closely with the
Oh, I
police
know
department.
that, and I thought she did a
So,
very good job. I'm just curious as to why the reporter, it's going to be a member of the police department.
Well, she was a unique resource that was, well suited to the role. In the past, we had some trouble finding somebody to fill that position and get somebody as well.
So was the concern that we wouldn't be able to really fill the position unless we placed it in the police department?
Right. Well, yes, I think that's correct.
Is there a safety issue that's also involved in this?
I think the police chief, successive police chiefs, I think, have wanted to have a school resource officer in the middle school. We had trouble affording it within the budget, but because there's the grant from the community chest and the Muse stabilization funds are available, the thought was perhaps we could give it a try.
So this is doing double duty. It's because that's the other
Yes.
unclear piece, is that this is the middle school safety officer and the children and family services person?
Yes, it's using those funds that were for the youth coordinator,
Well,
not the social,
okay,
not the social worker, but the youth coordinator grant from the community chest. Those funds will support this position.
All right.
Any comments from, ready to take affirmative action?
Want to do that one?
Yes. Yeah. Okay. I recommend that the select board take affirmative action on article number 9 in the amount of $49,000.
49? 48?
48?
I'm sure they'd take 49.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, state grant for transit services, appropriation of funds in the amount of $3,210.
Woo-hoo.
The funds have already been received from the state,
So
but
it's
they
just an
must be
allocation for
appropriated.
expense.
This
So
is
I would move affirmative, I would move that the select board recommend affirmative action on Article 10 in the amount of $3,210.
You got a second on that?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Moving right along, we're now legal services appropriation of funds in the amount of $100,000.
I did request a budget at the hearing. Several people requested a budget. I asked Melissa Allison for that. She said, I'll get that for you, and it's in the works. So I'll have more information on the budget for the litigation for the Estabrook Road matter, which is both a discovery component and the actual trial component, what her estimates of those costs would.
Melissa Allison is our litigation lawyer at our town
counsel's office.
Town counsel's
Yep.
office.
Yes, excuse me.
And as I remember, this $100,000 is the first significant increase in our legal funds. I think we increased it by, was it 25,000 last year?
Right,
So
which was
this
the first time in 15 years. we
Exactly. So this would be 125,000.
And this would be a one-time only. That's not a permanent increase in the legal budget. It would be a one-time
It would be
only.
for this year.
This year only.
So it would go back to
250.
250.
And I think it's important that it be realized that it's not just for the Estabrook Woods, that there was a number of other matters that we viewed with legal counsel on that have added up, and some of them have been unusual in terms of negotiating.
Collective bargaining.
Collective bargaining, so.
Right, and I would say that, you know, we're settling the eminent domain, I mean, there are things we're putting to bed this year which will not be dragging on our legal services, but have deferred the money or taken it up in the past. So, again, I think we'd all prefer not to have the need. But,
it's not a permanent increase, it's a
Right.
one-year
Yeah.
increase.
Exactly, it's a 1 year.
So I'm be in favor of affirmative action.
Okay. I recommend affirmative action in the amount of $100,000 for legal services for article number 11 as printed in the warrant.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. And amendment of Phase 2 Blackbird Site Development and Personal Use. This is considered a gift. Is that correct? Is that how it would?
Correct.
Right.
Yes.
I like gifts.
Yeah, acceptance of a gift.
Yes.
Yes.
I like giving them to when I can.
So I'm in favor of affirmative action.
Yeah.
I think especially since we learned that the state will not accept the affordable units and count them to our needs. I think that this might be a way to fund some opportunities in town that would, and might actually benefit other members of the community in a way that this might not have. So.
Do I hear a motion to take affirmative action on Article 12 as printed in the warrant?
Sure. I move that the select board recommend affirmative action on Article 12 as printed in the warrant, and that is a gift acceptance of $1 million for restricted use for affordable housing.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
You don't have to if you don't.
Yeah, please. Yep.
Jack McBride, 57 Everett Street, and partner with the Abode Builders. The purpose of the vote is not for gift acceptance. It's a modification of the preliminary, what's the term now? It's late, development, preliminary site development and use proposal. It was voted by town meeting that had, one of the criteria was 2 on-site. So it's a modification of that, so I just don't know if technically your
So
motion.
I think just as printed in the one, to approve, recommend affirmative action on Article 12 as printed in the warrant.
As printed in the warrant.
Yeah.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And the last one is the grant of easement.
Hold on one second.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, this is a difficult one for me because I can see both sides of the argument for this one. I think it's a wonderful opportunity, should the town decide that they want to accept this change, I think it's a wonderful opportunity for the town. On the other hand, we need multiple levels of, we could benefit from multiple levels of affordable housing, even if this was not counted on our SHI. So I'm really, I'm torn on this one, quite frankly. And I'll be prepared to support as the town goes forward.
But you want to abstain at this point?
So I guess I would feel more comfortable abstaining at this point. Thank you.
But it would still be affirmative 3-0.
Yep.
And the last one, the Bruce Friedman Rail Trail grant of easement, and the appropriation or transfer from available funds of $25,000. Again, this seems to be kind of a forward movement on the Bruce Friedman Rail Trail, and I would be in support of it.
As would I.
As would I.
Yeah, I would too. So I recommend affirmative action on Article number 13 for a grant of easement in the amount of $25,000 for the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, public comments. We've already taken a number as the other items went along, but if anybody has a public comment, I'm pleased. Yes, sir.
You've already taken positions. This is Matt Johnson, 21 Winthrop Street, member of the Planning Board, speaking on my own behalf. You've already taken positions on the articles, but one that stuck out for me is Article 9. And initially, that premise that somehow funds that are from the community chest that aren't expended for this would be lost. Community chest obviously has many other good things that they could spend money on. So, there's no real loss of funds at risk here, okay? The second thing is that, we're between budget cycles and we're funding permanent hiring within the police department, an individual who would be under terms that you can't easily get rid of that expense going forward. And so really, to be able to do that hiring without having the context of our annual personnel budget just doesn't seem responsible, especially at a meeting that's called for another primary purpose. So, I don't understand the position that the Select Board is taking here. And I also understand from the Chief of Police that he was planning to reassign an existing police officer to that position, and the hiring would be a backfill hire into the police force, general police force. So I can't understand why we can't go between now and town meeting with a trial period of, hey, assign that officer or part-time or whatever. And of course, I don't know all of the technical details around doing such a thing, but it just seems totally possible for us to get some better understanding of that resource goal, to be more responsible about our spending, and, you know, establish a precedent for what are we doing with special town meeting? Are we actually just preparing to have semi-annual town meetings going forward, that anybody just throws things in and we go ahead and support them? Or should we resist?
No, I mean, I think you raised good points. I guess, you know, just in response, and I know we don't usually make a response, but I do think that we've had issues in the school. Clearly, the drug issue is may not be a hotbed right now, but that's a problem that a lot of middle school kids are involved with. I think it would mean, in essence, as I understand it, that we would be, in essence, losing somebody who's in the middle school there because the person is no longer...
No, not quite. We don't have anyone in the middle school right now. Jennifer Clark was the youth coordinator, working part-time, about 20 hours a week, and serving mostly in the high school. I think most of her time was spent.
This is a new...
So this would be converting those resources. Instead of replacing her, it would be using those resources to hire somebody for the middle school for the first time.
Which the chief feels is a necessary position. And obviously, I don't think, and I guess what I'm saying is I don't think it's just a grab for a new position. It's trying to meet a need that is existing. And I think public safety is kind of number one job that as a select board member I look out for. But
Well, I wanted to highlight that I don't necessarily oppose this position.
Mm-hmm.
And when it's duly presented at annual town meeting, I'd love to look at it. And let's vote on it then. Why now?
No, fair point, and I think that's maybe part of the frustration of having open town meetings is a lot of things can come up that we may not want to have come up or we don't feel are coming up in the appropriate time. But well, this is true. I think it sends a message if we didn't, but and not a message that I want to send at this point.
That's a point well taken, I'm glad.
Yeah, no, as I say, I
Hopefully you'll be at
appreciate
town
it.
meeting and be
Yeah.
able to express that same thing.
Yeah. Any further public comments? Committee liaison reports. Linda?
Since the last meeting, I've attended 2 of the ZBA meetings, the Zoning Board of Approvals. One thing I would just note is that there was an accessory apartment approved, and the stated reason for the application by the applicant was that they were trying to remain in Concord and be able to pay their taxes going forward. So I just wanted to note that, given other discussions that we've had.
I've been out of town. And we
And
missed.
therefore not making meetings.
I've missed a few meetings.
Well, I'm sure they missed you as well. On the 18th, the Dog Park Feasibility Study Committee met, and they are working with Aaron Stevens for publicizing their public hearing, which is scheduled for November 13th. They've assigned members responsibilities for the presentation. There is a discussion regarding the presentation, and they are meeting next on October 24th at 5:30 p.m. in order to kind of review and make sure they're all in agreement with the presentation. The chair's breakfast I usually don't mention, but there is excellent attendance. There was some points made that tree lighting by the Recreation Department is to be held on December 2nd. The CPC is taking applications, and they expect approximately $1.5 million to be able to distribute. The Finance Committee is meeting on Thursday discussing the status of the budget and guidelines. And Council on Aging is seeking to hire a nurse, part-time, but may be able to coordinate with the Board of Health, which is also looking for a part-time nurse. The Council on Aging had difficulty in hiring part-time as the last nurse left to take a full-time position, and commuting time is a problem. And the Planning Board has been prioritizing items from the long-range plan, and they intend, although it sounded like a low priority, reviewing the wireless overlay district. And on last Thursday and Friday, I attended the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness MVP Community Resilience Building Workshop, which was at the police station. They coming up with action items to combat natural disasters and how to mitigate, prepare for, and respond to floods, natural disasters, droughts, and major storms. And it was a lot of big attendance and very well run. And I think Kate did an excellent job. And I'm usually a little skeptical about the group meetings, but it was interesting how productive it was. So it was enjoyable as well.
I attended the planning board meeting that was specifically focusing on a new development that happens to be across from my home in West Concord. And I attended that as a resident, but I know that Alice was unable to, so happy to report on what I thought was a very robust, I mean, it was a packed meeting. There were very few seats left unattended. In fact, I think there was standing room in the back. And I think that the planning board offered a lot of very pointed questions. I'm not sure where this goes from here. It's clear that there's I don't think I could count a single voice of support from the public, and there were extensive public comments. I may be wrong, but my memory serves, and Matt's in the room, so if I'm wrong, please correct me. I don't remember anybody standing up and saying this looks like a good idea. I think there seemed to be fairly, there's an understanding that the property is going to be developed, but what comes next is certainly something that the community is trying to grasp. I don't envy the planning board or the ZBA eventually. I also attended the PEG Access Advisory Committee, which, that is a very well-run committee, and still sort of getting underway. I will note that the point of information I offered to the group is the fact that the CCTV has formally filed with the Attorney General to dissolve, which was not necessarily something we had anticipated. So as of, is it
October 1.
October 1, Minuteman
Media
Network is the is PEG Access in Concord. And I certainly am impressed with the amount of activity that's going forward to embrace that. One of the things that our assistant town manager reported on was the hiring process to bring staff on, noting that 3 of the existing staff have applied for positions, and will likely...
2 are actually town employees now, and
2
the
are town.
third one has accepted a job offer, and it's in the process.
Okay, so there we have it. So that's...
Miscellaneous correspondence. I just received that there's going to be a celebration 50th anniversary of the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act on Sunday, October 14th, 2 to 5 p.m. in Concord, Mass.
Isn't that the North Bridge?
Yes, Minuteman National Historic Park and the Old Manse event will be held rain or shine. And there's apparently refreshments and raffles, guided paddles on the Concord River, special activity and explorations hosted by the Minuteman National Historic Park, the Old Manse, and the trustees of Sudbury Valley Trustees, ORS, and SUASCO River Stewardship Council, and more. So, and Congresswoman Nikki Songus will be there. So it'll be an event, yeah. Committee nominations, I don't see any, so we get to the appointment.
Don't we have something? I thought we had
We have an
an
appointment.
appointment.
Maybe I read
No,
it.
you- no, we have-
You're right.
No, you're right.
I'm conflating two.
We do have an appointment.
We do that one?
You wanna-
We're getting it.
I make a motion that we appoint Betsy Levinson of 124 Neshoba Road to Concord Local Cultural Council for a term to expire 5/13/18.
2021.
Oh. Yeah,
It says-
21. Thank you.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
5:30, oh, 5:31, okay, got it. 5:31, 21.
Thank you.
Now, Linda, for your motion that's bound to get acceptance,
Second, for sure.
all in favor?
Aye. It's good to hear from Betsy Levinson again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm glad.
Former editor of the Concord Journal.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, everyone.
Oh, move to adjourn.
A little longer than, that was, yeah.
I just moved to adjourn.
Oh, second, aye.
Aye.